Stage 3 of the template for UBD is about developing your lesson plan. And I know that oftentimes when we're working in our undergraduate work, we think, why do we have to do this extremely drawn out lesson plan? There's so much to it. There's no way I'm ever going to do it on a daily basis when I get out into the world of work. And I think what a lot of us find that are active teachers or have been active teachers in the past is that lesson planning really is what is the key to ensuring that students are getting the acquired knowledge that we want them to get. That they're not just being left at that knowledge-based level, that they're getting to the understanding, that they're getting the differentiation that they need, that they're being given ample opportunity to assess and reassess and different types of assessment to ensure that students are learning and that we're doing our job and doing the best that we can to make sure that all students are learning. And so with UBD, the logic of backward design mandates that learning plans align with the goals and corresponding assessment. So the key to it is when most of us were practicing as undergraduates in the student teaching realm, or even in our first few years of teaching, we would teach kind of what we liked, or this is what the textbook said, or this is what the person before me did that left me these things. And as we started to develop as teachers, we found that it's much more effective to say, this is what I want them to know. This is where it lines up in terms of what's required by the Iowa Core, by the Core, by the old standards and benchmarks of our school district, however that was. And then it was moved into that idea of, how do I teach it? So a lot of us make that shift naturally from, this is what I want to teach, and then I'm going to make up a test here at the end, to, this is the assessment that I have. Here's the teaching instruction, the strategies. How do they line up? And that's what UBD in this third stage of the template really is geared towards. And it's also important to remember that you need to be flexible as a teacher. And so I've taught with people who have said, oh, I have to be on page 45 tomorrow, and if I don't, it's going to throw off my whole quarter or my whole semester. And I've said to them, but what happens if the students don't understand what's on page 43? Well, that's too bad. We've got to move on. And so a lot of the work I'm doing with teachers in the peer coaching realm is getting them to understand it's okay to be flexible. It's okay to reteach. It's okay to say, wow, I really am noticing a lot of our students are struggling with that content. I need to go back, reteach it, and reassess it. And it's okay to be flexible in your lesson planning and say, that really didn't work. I need to figure out a new way to do that. And we oftentimes in the undergraduate realm have talked about, we don't want to feel like we've hurt our pride as teachers. Well, we have to understand that it's not about us, it's about what our students are doing. And that's a big shift, a big paradigm shift that UBD is working towards and helping us understand. Is it's about what's going on in the classroom. How actively engaged are our students in the learning process? How connected is the learning process to the assessment process? And what are we doing as teachers to facilitate that? And that's what the third point mentions here, is just talking about the big picture, seeing the big picture. Oftentimes when you talk to administrators or people that are running schools, they talk about this balcony approach with the top-down view of, how is my classroom interconnected to the rest of the community? Oftentimes as teachers, we think about our room as an isolated situation, where we should be thinking about, how does it fit into the middle school? How does it fit into the elementary school? How does it fit into the K-3 building? Those kind of things that really help us develop these ideas and strategies of understanding that as students continue their educational journey, we see them carry this prior knowledge with them, so that when they get to the next grade and they're studying something very similar, they can make quick connections and allow that teacher to be more flexible in what they're doing to either push the rigor, push the students, develop a more rigorous classroom environment, or say, wow, we really missed the boat with that one. We need to reteach it so that all students can have a similar prior knowledge. So that's the third part of the template. And then this is Module C. And Module C really just talks about different parts of what you should consider when you're teaching using the UBD model. And the first one talks about product versus process. And I've always been a big believer in the process. And I've coached for a long time, been a teacher for a long time. While it's important to put a nice finished product on the field, on the court, in the classroom, it doesn't happen without the process. So sometimes you have to take a look and say, that's not working. We're struggling here. How do we change that? And you have to spend more intensive time. So I've learned from the fact that sometimes I like to give student-led learning. And sometimes the students aren't picking up on what I think they need to be picking up on, or what my assessment says they need to be picking up on in terms of the standards. And so what I'll do then is I'll say, it's great that you guys did this on your own. Let's see how that can relate to what else we need to know. And so that's part of that process, making adjustments and being flexible. And it talks about here that the template allows UBD teachers to link things to standards and assessment, but also we want to make sure through this process that the final product isn't just chance that the students got it right, that you made every one of them C on the multiple choice test and they all got it right. The idea is that students shouldn't have any question when it comes to what material is going to be on the assessment, what the expectations are with that assessment, and that's where the process and the product come together. And so the process, a good process will lead to a good product. And that's part of what we really are stressing with our teachers and our parents on SBG and SRG is the process. Trust the process. And you'll hear coaches say that. You'll hear teachers say that. You'll hear administration say that. Even hear CEOs of companies say, trust the process. If the process is genuine, the product will be where you want it to be. And that's very true with schools and UBD. So now there are about 9 kind of points that I put some questions here for you to think about in terms of what instruction you're doing, in terms of how are you going about teaching things. And so these are the questions that came out of the textbook, but the questions I put underneath of them were guiding me to think about what I do in my room, what I do with the teachers that I work with, what they're doing in their classrooms, and that sort of thing. So the first one, what kind of designer are you? Do you like to have a step-by-step lesson plan? Or are you somebody who has these kind of instructional chunks of strategies? And so I want you, like I said, to think about these as we go along and maybe jot them down somewhere in your notes and think about, how does this help me? How is this going to shape or guide what I'm doing in my classroom or what I'm going to do in my unit that I build for this final of this class? Number 2, what kind of content goals will you focus on? So how important are things like scaffolding, vocabulary, and basic skill development? Or can you just jump right into the understanding? How much of the knowing level of Bloom's taxonomy, identifying those sort of words, do you need to do in your room or in your class to ensure that that larger understanding comes? And that's a discussion and this is a question I ask a lot of the peer people I work with in my peer coaching. The next one, what's the scope of your unit? And so again, we're talking about Bloom's taxonomy. And I'll go ahead and post in the UIU Learn either this week or next week. I have a 3D model of Bloom's taxonomy that talks about rigor and how are you developing rigor. And it might be something that you've already seen from your district, or it might be something that you can use, or it might be something that you say, I like Bloom's, but I'm just not sure where I fit on that. 4, is it best to start with a new unit or revise an old one? And really, it comes down to you as an individual teacher. Are you somebody that can just, on a drop of a dime, say, really don't like the way this is going, the next half of this unit, I'm going to switch around? Or do you need to go and say, I want to develop a new unit. I want to take some of the things I've already had from that unit previously and put them in and create a whole new unit. And then that talks, some of these other questions talk about that, but what areas of need do you need to worry about? Do you have students who are struggling readers, who are struggling with basic math, computation, facts, and can it be fixed by something like a calculator? Or what sort of prior knowledge skills do you need to help them acquire before they can do that? So what are some of the weaknesses you have in terms of student achievement and your instructional goal? And so an example might be, maybe you teach in a class that you have 10 or 15 students in, and over half of them are on IEPs, and they all have a reading goal. You might have to think about, how do I build prior knowledge in a specific content with students who have reading disabilities versus students who maybe score in the higher percentiles on reading assessments. So those are some of the things you have to think about as you're developing your skills. There's 4 more. And then again, do you start with a whole unit, or do you work on a lesson? Do you say, this is the assessment for the end of the lesson? Maybe it's 2 days. Do I want to try UBD in that form, or do I go and go for a whole unit? And to me, that makes the most logical sense, is to pick a unit and just try it. And going back to that being flexible part, that's part of that. Understanding that things aren't always going to work and having the ability to adjust that. The seventh one, what about starting with a lesson? You can do that, right? You could change in that lesson-to-lesson approach and create a long-term UBD design. But you want to also think about those lessons. If I do this for 1 or 2 lessons in this unit, how does that affect my outcome? Or does it affect the essential questions? Do the students know what the essential questions are? Have I posted learning targets in my room? Do I have I-CAN statements? All those kind of things. And then number 8 has 3 questions I want you to think about. And like I said, I very rarely use a textbook because in history, things are changing constantly in social studies. And so it's important to remember and think about that textbooks are typically organized by topic, not transfer goals. Textbooks generally place too much emphasis on the basic level, the understanding, not the understanding, the knowledge, the identification, as opposed to the understanding. So they focus on those lower level blooms and not the higher, deeper. And oftentimes they put too much emphasis on those and not enough emphasis on how do I transfer this knowledge to something else. And then the last one, what might be a preferred entry point for me? Do I need to use the template? Am I somebody that can make this circular flow work for me without putting all these things into a template? And in this class, we're going to be using the template. We're going to be designing a unit, and I think that will give you a clear understanding of what's the best way to go about doing that and building that. So this is the last part of the modules A, B, and C. Right? There's some you need to read them in the textbook as well. Just a reminder that there is a post due this week on Thursday, and then you have to respond by Sunday, and that's posted in the UIU Learn. So each week there will be a PowerPoint, and there will be some overview that goes like this, as well as there will be Zoom meetings on Sunday nights from 7:30 to 8:30, starting Sunday, October 29th. And so that'll give you a chance if you have any questions or if you want to talk about what's going on in your classroom, you want some ideas, you want me to pick my brain a little bit, those things will all be available at those Zoom meetings. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And otherwise, have a good rest of your week. Thank you.